Welcome to the days and the works of significant pioneers in the field of prenatal sciences. Our journey today will take us to the Netherlands. We are just landing in Amsterdam, a beautiful city full of significant sights and a wonderful countryside where the water is always present. We'll leave Amsterdam and we'll cross the tulip fields as we head towards a little village, Prebirth. It's a very quiet place, a beautiful place to live. This is where we are going to meet John R.G. and Troy Turner. They have been living here for the last 30 years, if not longer than that. The Turners are pioneers in prebirth psychology since 1970, co-founders of the Whole Self-Discovery and Development Institute. Here we are, just outside their house in Prebirth. Let's get inside and meet John Turner. More than a century has already passed since the times that we started exploring the prenatal field. And during these years, there were a lot of people, pioneers, who have developed our understanding. Each of these people has left a mark on this path. Some traces were soft, but some others really strong, initiating new perspectives, opening up avenues of understanding and showing the way for others to follow. I'm very glad to present you today John R.G. Turner, and welcome, John.
Thank you.
Great.
Well, I'm still active and going forward.
Great.
Evolving.
Evolving, still evolving. So let's go back even before conception, your conception. And let's meet the context. Where were you? When was that? And what was the context in which you were conceived? John?
Well, it was in the time of the 1929 serious economic condition in the world. So even though that recession was starting to dissipate in 1933 when I was conceived, that was mid-1933, there was still a lot of serious economic problems in America at that time. There was also a movement in America by the sharp right wing and a Catholic priest who was trying to destroy the American democracy. It's almost being replicated right now between Trump and the right wing in America. It's very fascinating. And that was almost, 90 years ago.
Right.
So that was the context in which I was conceived.
Right. And what would you say were the main values despite the challenges of the time, recession, dangers for democracy, etc., what were the values of those years?
That Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as the newly elected president, was valuing the human being.
Right.
The human being, not the society as such, although the human beings composed the community of human beings. It was the respect and the honoring of the individual human being as part of America. So
Right.
there was the context of America and the human being as emblematic of that.
Right. Thank you, John. Let's bring our attention to your parents. And John, what is the best you remember of your father?
Well, he was a dentist. He was the first of his family to go to university. His family had come from Central Europe, from Czechoslovakia, and he met my mother. I don't know exactly how they met, to be truthful. I never did ask. I would love to ask questions of them now, things that I didn't think of asking in the facts when they were still alive. But he was an extremely energetic person. He was the president of the Dental Society for the state of Connecticut. He was the president of the Red Cross chapter for Connecticut. He was highly, highly respected. And I remember even years after he died, one day I was walking on East Main Street, where his office was, and people were coming up to me and saying, "Oh, you are the son of the doctor." They could recognize me. I didn't have any idea how, but they would tell me how during the Depression, he would not only give them dental treatment, but he would even give them money to buy food.
Now I can understand why you have the same spirit in you and the same behaviors, because you also do that so often.
Well, I didn't say that. You said it.
Yes, I said that. So your dad, your father, what was his name?
John, he was also John. Yeah.
He was also John.
Yeah.
And he was also a person who supported the health and well-being or added to the quality of life of the people.
There was a phrase in those days called, they would say, the doctor. That was a pronunciation of honor. And that's what he was. He was the spiritual support of the community.
Your mom?
Well, I know very little about her, to be truthful.
Yeah.
Because it was more, our attention was more from the father's side of the family. But her mother was one of the, as far as I know, maybe even the first woman to be an undertaker in America. An
Really?
undertaker is you know what that is, to embalm and bury people. And her family, her and her husband, were two pioneers in that very early in the 20th century.
Great.
So she was, again, a pioneer.
Yes.
And
And the best you can remember of her as a being, as a mother?
well, I was very independent. from a very early age. And I do have one time that I remember going, my grandmother had a house on top of the hill in Bridgeport, the highest point, and my father bought the house from her, and she moved with her husband farther down the hill, halfway down the hill. And one day I decided to go visit her. So I walked down. It was, and I was quite young, and went to see her. I wanted to see my grandmother. So I walked. It seemed to upset people quite a lot. I must have been very young because they were very upset that I had gone myself all that way. But then I remember another visit to her. It may have been the same one. She had a canary.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a beautiful bird. And I picked up the cage, and I held it out the window, and I let it go.
Mm.
And we were all very upset because, of course, she was on the second floor of the house,
Yeah.
first floor in Europe, and the canary was killed.
Oh,
And
really?
they said, "Why did you do that?" I said, "I wanted to see it fly." But I didn't know that I had to take it out of the cage. So that was a good lesson early in life.
Which was what, John?
Which was what?
What was the lesson?
Oh, when you're curious about something, be sure you understand what you're dealing with to get the answer.
Right. Excellent lesson. Right. And from your mother's side, what was your mother's name?
Elisabetta.
Elisabetta. So, from your mother's side, what can you bring which created value for you?
Well, again, the pioneering work,
Mhm.
that's the main thing, I think.
Of the early years, let's focus on exactly the period around your conception and the conception. So, how would you speak about your conception?
Well, we have to go back earlier in my mother's childhood.
Really?
At that time in the United States, there was an epidemic of tuberculosis.
Uh-huh.
And in her family, her brother had died, and her sister had tuberculosis, and she had tuberculosis. And she was in a hospital. And when she was released from the hospital, the doctor said to her, you should never have children, because he was concerned for the slightness of
Mm.
her physical condition. Well, years later, she married and she became pregnant. I don't know how it happened. I never really had an interest in that because I knew that I wasn't supposed to have been conceived. That was what came to me. So a key of my early life was being inappropriate. So I had to prove that I could be appropriate.
Right.
That was the main theme there.
Actually, John, what you are communicating is how important it is, the context in which we were conceived, and how significant it for the years, decades later in our life.
That's right. And in the same sense that for Troya, uh, her parents were married, and after 4 years, the priest came to the house and said, "What's going on here? You're not getting a baby. You should be doing that." So she had to go to the doctor and find out. Turned out that she had a condition in her of what's called a tipped uterus. So the doctor did an operation, and uh, eventually Troya was conceived.
Right.
But again, it was from a conflict between having a child, not having a child, being impossible to have a child, being possible to have a child, how an operation could change things. And I think a great deal of that resulted in Troya ultimately becoming a head nurse.
Right.
You see, all of you take that early stuff and then you bring it to the complete uh, amazement of what she became as a human being and how many people she has helped. It's amazing.
Right. Right. And if we stay a little bit in those early days, how would you speak about the gestation experience for you?
Well, again, she was pregnant and she wasn't supposed to be pregnant. So again, that built up the whole resistance to having a baby because the doctor said she shouldn't have a baby, and it was happening. So there must have been a sense of helpless, hopeless, and powerless, and doing the wrong thing. What did she do that was wrong? That she became pregnant. So again, it can become very, very complex of all those different patterns.
Right. And how did you experience these from your point of view?
I was only experiencing her. I
Right.
wasn't yet analyzing what it was going to do for me,
Yeah.
because we know in our whole self prenatal psychology that the consciousness of the child is with the mother's consciousness, but it doesn't have the intellectual capacities. It's only processing what she's doing.
Right. So
So
you
I don't have a program for me. I have her program.
right. So this is what you share, that you have her programs in
That's
from those early days, your early days.
and we can explain that more when we're
Yeah.
discussing our psychology.
Yes, right. And what about your birth experience?
Well,
Was it a natural birth, easy birth, traumatic, cesarean? What?
I think it was a natural birth, but again, it's the resistance to having the baby born.
Right.
I was born. Uh, the thing was that after the birth, you mentioned bonding. Bowlby did extensive research on attachment and bonding, and at that time, I my main memory of my mother was that she was in bed, and the nurse or uh, nanny, I had a nanny at that time, bringing me as a child to my mother to have her hold me for a while, and then the nanny took me away. So I really had no attachment and bonding to my mother. If anything, I would have had to that nanny whose name I have no idea at this moment.
Yeah.
But I learned the independence. At some point, I learned that I didn't need to have a mother or a nanny to attach to. I attached to myself, I think, is what happened.
Right. And starting from that or following that, what was the next experience for you as a young child and then an adolescent?
Well, again, I learned independence. One of my clear memories is that there was the high school was near our house, and they had a field, sports field, and we used to go there and bake potatoes. We built a little fire and we would bake potatoes.
Oh,
So
really?
I remember baking potatoes as a very young child in for myself, and I guess there were some other children there that we did that too. But I do, and I remember eating the potatoes. So again, I had to make the fire, I had to cook the potatoes, and I had to eat the potatoes. So again, it was process. There had to be steps.
Right.
And I think that uh, gave me a real capacity to recognize steps that have to be taken in any process.
Right.
And
Right.
that's what our whole self pre-birth psychology is all about. It's logic. Is the and ethics. Ethics and logic are probably the keynotes of my early life.
When did you first realize that this is what you would like to do?
Oh, well, I had always wanted. I have to go back again. Uh, as a child, uh, I did not speak till I was over 3 years old. I was in my third year when I started to speak. Uh,
Was
but
it because you could not speak? I mean, was there a pathology?
not that I'm aware of, okay? But in any case, I didn't. But what it gave me was the ability to listen carefully.
Mhm.
So I could, even in a group, I could tell when someone was speaking the truth and when they were not speaking the truth. And I think that was the beginning of my therapy training.
Right.
Okay. So then, uh, even after I started uh, learning to listen, I had not the idea of a therapy. I didn't know what, that was not a conception that I had. But what I did want to do was radio.
Mhm.
I wanted to become a radio announcer. And a very important uh, uh, event that comes to my mind is my father was a dentist. And at that time, there was a character in advertising of Camel cigarettes,
Mm.
a young lad who who held the package, and I think his name was Johnny, and he was a patient of my father. And one day, my father he invited my father, and my father took me to a radio broadcast in New York City. And I just wanted to be in radio. That's the earliest memory that I could of an intention.
How old were you?
Well, I was under 10, that's for sure. So that was my desire. The only problem was I couldn't talk.
Yeah, that can be a problem to a radio
in,
broadcaster.
in the sense that my brain, it simply didn't give me anything to say. I live every moment, in fact, this was been told to me many times, that when I wake up in the morning, it's completely new. I don't have impact from what happened the day before.
Right.
And so I still have that. That is still a quality. As I say, even thinking about doing this broadcast, I didn't know what I was going to be able to say because it's all blank.
Right.
I mean, it's like, what do they call it? Being in the spiritual realm,
Void.
in the void. I'm in the void almost all the time. And that's one of the most wonderful things about my relationship with Troya, is that she fills my void every day.
Right.
You see? So in any case, it wasn't when I was in grammar school. It was one of the first schools like Montessori and these very specialized children's education. There was a school called Onkawa. It's an Indian name, and I had an experience where I was working one day on the school newspaper, and it was making with a very sharp stylus on wax paper. You had to, to make a drawing. And one day I was doing that, and the stylus broke. Oh, and the principal of the school came in, and he said, "Did you break the stylus?" And I said, "No." That's the personality defense, right? You say, "No, I didn't do it." He was one of the most amazing men because he didn't judge that I had said something wrong. He gave me a lesson on the importance of truth.
Mhm.
Wow, truth. And so every time I hear somebody on the news saying you have to speak the truth, I'm remembering that wonderful, his name was Frederick Werk. Werk. It must be a Dutch name, I guess. There might be a link there. But I learned and I realized just recently that was the moment I became a journalist. I was working on that school newspaper, and he taught me the absolute necessity when you're doing something, reporting, you have to speak the truth. In January of 2022, there was an interview with an American representative of Congress by the name of Jamie Raskin.
Mm-hmm.
And Jamie Raskin said, they were talking about healing. It was on CNN. And he said, truth is the road to healing. Wow. Truth is the road to healing. Talking about the American situation politically with what is so many people believing lies. And I said, wow, that really is. Again, that's what triggered me to remember what happened when I was beginning my role in journalism. Later, he said his father had said democracy heals the truth. I'm sorry, no. Democracy needs the truth to stand on. And that's exactly the whole lesson of what is happening if America is going to save democracy now.
So actually what you are communicating, John, is that every experience from before conception, gestation, birth, infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, has a hidden key which guides us and unlocks our own path towards fulfilling who we are in this life experience.
Yes, and when I was in high school at Fairfield College Preparatory School, they had a radio club. I remember being in that club, not realizing that I would ever be on radio, but it was just something that seemed like a nice thing to do at the time, as I recall it. But then when I was at the College of the Holy Cross in my junior year, well, at some point in that, they had a radio club also, and I became the chief announcer for that club. And then there was an announcement that one of the radio stations in Worcester, in Massachusetts, was looking for an announcer for the evening programs. And several of the people from the college radio station went down there, and somebody said, why don't you go down? Well, I really still couldn't talk very well, but I was made the chief announcer. I don't know how it happened, but I got the job. And it turned out that every night, Monday through Friday, I was on the air from 6:15 to 12:15 every night. It was a network programming, and also I developed a program called Casual Classics, which was popular music in the classical field. And people could call in and request. We had a pretty good library. And so I was forced literally to have to learn how to talk, because I had to tell people that they could call the station and request things. I had to really develop my ability to do that. And then I moved to Boston, and I had a radio program on a 50,000 watt radio station at Boston University.
How did this happen?
Well, what happened was that I had a friend. No, I remember I was watching a morning television program, and there was a man named Shlomo Carlbach, who was a Jewish rabbi and a professional singer. And he was amazing. And I said to myself, I would love to interview that man. And my father had given me as a gift one of the very first portable radio transcribers, recorders. It was it was big, and it weighed about 50 pounds. So I called the television station and found out that Rabbi Karlbach was staying at a motel nearby, across from Boston University, actually. And I asked if he could be willing to have an interview. And I recorded an interview with him. And then I took it to Boston University and offered it to them. And they liked it so much, they said, "Can you do any other interviews?" And that's how I got that. And I did that for 6 years.
How
every
many
week.
interviews?
Over 300 that I'm aware of.
Can you remember any names?
Well, it was mostly the people who were writing books on psychology and spirituality and New Age consciousness. This was in the 60s. So it was, there were people who were expressing a lot. And I was able to do that for 6 years. And then one day, people kept saying, why don't you go to Hollywood? And I kept saying, well, I don't know anybody. Then one day I got an invitation to go to Los Angeles to give a lecture. And I went to a radio station there in Hollywood that I knew had what was new consciousness, I guess you could call it. And it was a lady there that invited me to come. I don't know how I had made her acquaintance, but I did. And she had been doing a radio program there, and she took me around the studios, and the program director came in, and she introduced us, and he says, "Oh, I've been wanting you to do a program for us for years." I don't know how he knew what I was doing in Boston, but he knew. And I had done some programs for National Public Radio, 13-inch programs that they ran nationally. So he said, then the lady said, "I'm leaving in 2 weeks. Why don't you take my place?" And he says, "That's a great idea." So 2 weeks later, I had a radio program in Hollywood. What I didn't remember until 3 years later, when I was leaving to go to Hawaii, I was moving to Hawaii, and I was driving to the studio in Hollywood, and I remembered that a dream I had had as a child was to have a radio program in Hollywood. And I had done it. And I hadn't realized I was doing it till I had finished the last program.
Right.
So it taught me that how many times in life do we have dreams that we fulfill that we don't remember that they had been dreams.
So among the people of either the Boston years or the Hollywood times, people around spirituality, New Age, consciousness, etc., do you remember any special person who had a big impact on you?
Well, I think Alan Watts. He was a philosopher in America at that time. And we did an interview about death and dying. And a week later, he died. And it impacted me in the way that it was like I was helping him to sort out his thinking of what he was going to do in his own life.
Right.
And I became very interested in how the context of what we call past lives or reincarnation could happen. If we have a life in which we have challenges and we don't resolve those challenges, and we have so many of them, we can't do them all in one life, we let go and we go to the next life. And the way we do that is by having unresolved patterns. Some people might call them hell. I don't. They're just unresolved patterns. And my consciousness is energetically attracted to a mother and father who are vibrating with those same patterns. That was what gave me that context. That then I'm in this next life, through that mother and father, being offered the opportunity to activate the patterns, recognize them, live them, and release them. Yes.
Right. So this brings us to take full responsibility of who we are and who we become.
Yes. Yes. But it's all part of the development of the whole self. And that was really all through that time. I became very interested in the past life work. I was able to learn how to be a very skilled regression therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was invited to work with the Prebirth, and I learned about the Prebirth work. Another memory that I have of Alan is he had invited us to stay at his ranch in California, and I remember he had several peacocks who were screaming a lot. I was also just reminiscing about him. He was an amazing man. You know, he was the first person to really integrate Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy. So, and we had a weekly radio program with him that I put on WBUR at Boston University at the same time that I was doing my radio programs there. So I felt a very close relationship with him. Another person who was also very powerful in my life was Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller was an amazing man who developed the geodesic dome. Those are the domes that are made from triangles, you know, and very amazing instruments. And he was the first to create that. And I remember I was in Toronto one time, and there was a huge geodesic dome that they had built. And there was an exhibition about media. Mm-hmm. And it just happened that while I was there, that was the exhibition that was being presented. So I went to see what the media was about, having been in broadcasting myself and having been a journalist with the magazine. So I was standing in front of a teletype machine. They had about 6 of them in a row, and I was standing in front of a teletype machine which prints out news for the radio and television people to read. At that moment, it started ringing, ding, 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 alert. Buckminster Fuller has died. And the whole building went black. It was, you know, we could say a coincidence, but it was amazing that at that instant, when that message came through, everything went black in the huge, huge building. And fortunately, it came back on again shortly. But that gave me a very important message in my life, to be alert about what I'm realizing as I'm describing these two is that both of them were talking with me in interviews about death and dying, and both of them died within a couple of weeks of those interviews. It was like we were presetting their consciousness to understand what death was about. And I had, as you know, clinically died 4 times. So I knew what death and dying was about. And it just at that particular period of time in the 60s, I was very alert that there is no such thing as death.
Mm.
And how do I know? Because when I left my body, I could see my body.
Right.
So
Is
that
there,
seemed to be a little mission I had at those times with 2 of those men.
so actually what you are communicating here with these 2 specific inspirators of yours is that death is
It's a continuing state of existence.
right.
As someone said, it's like going from this room to the next room.
Right.
And I said, no, it's like going from this side of this room to the other side of this room.
Right. And being alert, how do you mean that? Being alert and death?
Well, just knowing that there is no death.
Right.
There is no death.
Okay.
It's just the important thing is how one goes from this side of the room to the other side. Is there peace and quiet, or is there trauma and disaster? And
Right.
how one feels as one makes that transformation from one side to the other. Is it easy, or is it something that I have to work on in another physical incarnation?
Right.
So what I'm trying to complete there is that there's a conflict with many people about whether reincarnation is a true existence or exists. And I can just, from my own experience, I can't convince them that it exists, but I can just give some examples that I know. I mean, the first time it happened, I was in a doctor's office. I was having abdominal pain, and I remember very clearly he gave me an injection, and then I was looking at him, and suddenly I was like just above my body, and I was wondering. He turned around and he was cleaning off his counter, and then he came back with another. I knew now was adrenaline, and but I was amazed that I was able to see. And then I told him what happened. When I saw him happen, he was quite shocked. And then the next time I was at the Leahy Clinic on Boston, again for some kind of pain in my abdomen, and I remember the doctor doing calling Dr. Blue, which is a signal for the cardiac team to rush to that room. And I said, after she revived me, I said, that was very interesting. And she said, what are you talking about? I said, well, I was watching how what everyone was doing. And I told her where everyone was and what they were saying, the whole conversation. And again, it was like an education. That there is no death.
Right.
For her. And her team had already left, but it was just her hearing those words. So again, that just seemed to be the little dynamic that my consciousness was in those times.
Right. So that was in the 60s.
Yes, and then that was when I met Bucky Fuller, and I remember after hearing that he had, or seeing on the teletype that he had died, his interview with me again had talked about death, and then I heard later that he had his wife in that day had been taken to hospital, and he was sitting in a chair next to her bed, and he knew that she was afraid to die.
Mm.
So this is anecdotal, of course. He told her, relax, it's okay, I'll meet you there. And sitting in the chair, he died so he could go over and meet her when she came through.
Right. Now, from these early decades in your life, how did you integrate these early inspirations to the next phase of your development?
I didn't do anything. It just, my life flows. That's how I've lived for 87 and a half years. It's a receptive process.
Right.
You know, when I first became interested, I had read a story about Shirley Temple, a child movie star, and she had mentioned how her mother, who was from Germany originally, a Germanic stock, and had done everything she intentionally could to create a wonderfully inspirational, creative little girl. She lived in Santa Monica, California, and walked on the beach there, on the heights. It's a beautiful place. I lived in Santa Monica years later. And she went to concerts at the Hollywood Bowl. She went to the museums. She did incredibly creative things, read out loud poetry. And Shirley Temple was born. And she, as I say, this was a story that I had been telling for several years. And then one day I was at a bookshop in the London train station, and
Right.
my eye caught this book, Child Star, Shirley Temple. This is what I mean. I'm always given gifts, wonderful ideas, wonderful confirmations that life is really a pretty wonderful and exciting adventure. And that's how I've always thought of things in life, as adventures, little adventures. Oh, I met Thomas Fernie, I met Peter Fedor Freiberg. These are the two really great pioneers of prenatal psychology. And to come specifically to your question, I did the early past life work. I did the death and dying work for another little phase. Then I was really introduced into the prenatal work. So all of those kind of built on each other. And here we are today.
Yeah. So what are your main findings after so many years of living in the flow and collecting all of the treasures of life?
Well, as I mentioned a little while ago, I had been invited to California, and I was doing a radio program on KPFK, which was a 50,000 watt station covering most of California. And at the same time, I was invited to, I was in fact given an office in Beverly Hills.
Mm-hmm.
And I started getting patients who had been rejected by their therapists as incurable. And I had this wonderful Spanish carved desk. It's really an amazing treasure. I wish I had it now. I don't anymore, but I still remember it. I had done a case with a patient. They didn't have money. They gave me a desk. So that's how I got that wonderful desk. I did lots of trades in those days. I even traded for an old car once. I remember. So in any case, I was thinking, what can I do? You know, these people have been 5, 10, a couple people, 20 years in therapy without getting to the cause of their problem. So there was a man there. I don't remember what his name was at the moment, but I remember it was a man. And I was inspired to ask him, during your mother's pregnancy, did she have any trauma? And he says, I don't know. So I got the idea to ask him to close his eyes. And I said, please allow your whole self, the part of you that knows everything you've ever experienced. Did your mother have any trauma while she was pregnant? And he said, yes. So then I just guided him back to what his mother was doing and what was happening and what she was feeling. Now, the interesting thing here is not only did we discover that he was living the feelings that she had during that time and the trauma that she had, but we found out that working on trauma in therapy is not the right way to go. The problem is not the trauma after the event. The problem is the feeling that people have just before a trauma strikes and what happens to that feeling when the trauma strikes. How does it turn? The transition moment. And we were able to help people. In effect, what happens is the baby is born in a hypnotic trance that the mother goes into when she's traumatized. So we help people to identify the trauma trance and we dehypnotize them.
How did this grow? You have this dehypnotization from the trance.
That was basically the pattern. Of course, at that time, I was very active with the Association for Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology and Health. David Chamberlain's magnificent book was, David was a good friend of mine there.
Yeah.
And of course, then Thomas Fernie wrote a number of books. Tomorrow's Baby.
Yes.
Was another book that he wrote.
Yes.
And so I did a lot of lecturing. Basically, that was the main thing, was doing a lot of lecturing and radio programs, television programs in Los Angeles. there was on KABC, there was a night show, an evening program, and the uh, announcer, the interviewer, would invite me to come, and then he would read a Time magazine while I was doing the program. I remember that picture very, very clearly. And I was just able to sense by asking people what they had discovered about their pre-birth information, that they could heal themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's again, it's energy.
Mm-hmm.
It's the baby is born with the energy patterns of the mother. And this is probably the most important thing that in years later, I traveled to some 30 countries, over 30 countries, uh, and did workshops and programs all over the world there. And what people discover is that they were never inside their mother's body in her womb. That was probably even more important than the discovery about the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we discovered there, and what I didn't tell them, they get this from their own experience in the workshop, is that they are in the mother's energy field, in her bioenergetic field that is surrounding and animating her body, vivifying her body. And when we're able to help people recognize that, then they can understand how easy it is to say, yes, that was mother's energy pattern. And it's not through the physical so much as it's through the energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very important, because as that information becomes more prevalent in the world, the whole conflict about abortion becomes moot. In other words, if the consciousness of the baby is not in the mother's womb, in that little functioning object that she's creating for herself, part of her body, not a baby's body, part of her body, then the whole idea of killing a baby does not exist, because the consciousness of the baby was not ever inside that womb. It's always around. And maybe even in your own life, women who have said, I've had a feeling that I'm pregnant, but I've never had any intercourse with any man. It's true, because the consciousness, then we can sort of broaden it out. How does it get to mother's bioenergetic field, into her consciousness? Again, we go into the past life work. See how it sort of overlaps into the pre-birth, the past life work. I die in a past life dimension of consciousness with unresolved patterns. I have to come back into this reality, three-dimensional reality, to activate and release those patterns. That's what evolution is all about. So my consciousness in a non-physical dimension is in these patterns, vibrational patterns. Energetically, my consciousness perceives somewhere, and I don't have the exact medical or mathematical dimensions of it, a mother and a father with mother who are vibrating with the same patterns that I had when I died in a past life. So I can be attracted to that mother even years before she is ever pregnant, because she's already vibrating with that pattern. So I can actually be here in this dimension without a physical body, just in mother's consciousness, experiencing all of the events that she's going through during her life.
So actually, why does this happen? I mean, in gestation or during the pregnancy of the mother, what is the opportunity for the newborn or the new human being later to be born? And how does this continue to be an opportunity later on as the child becomes an adult?
Well, because it's setting up the program. In other words, it establishes a new vibrational pattern for a possible development of evolution. Each time I go into a new body, I'm evolving my consciousness. So what we've discovered also through whole self pre-birth psychology is that the baby's consciousness has a way to evolve without really doing anything. It's vibrationally attracted and attaches to mother. And even if mother becomes pregnant and the pattern changes and the consciousness is not going to get what it needs for its evolution, it can release from mother's trauma, mother's aura, and the little body that she was developing for me releases. It's called a miscarriage. So even a miscarriage, although it, for some people it can be extremely painful, the loss, it's not anything criminal, whether it's a natural abortion or a clinical abortion. It's simply a process. And again, if we can release the belief systems of some philosophies and religions that there is a murder, it doesn't exist. It's a false philosophy. But it has given some people, a great deal of pain and suffering. At 88 years of age, I do not need to wear any glasses, and I can see across the parking lot to beyond the houses on the other side. I have amazing eyes. So I went to him and I said, why am I able to see so well? And he said, because your pupils are very pinhole. The smaller the pupil, the clearer the vision for the longer of the time. When the pupils are very open, people need glasses. That's amazing. So I learned that. And I just love seeing, I always am looking up and down. And another thing that I learned from the Bates method in Australia is when I'm looking at you, I'm not just looking in your focus of your eyes, but I'm seeing the widest vision that I can. That was the secret of the Bates method of being able to see well. People lose their vision because they start narrowing it, and it's essential to open it. Mothers can look at their children. How many of them really look at their children and observe how they are behaving in certain situations?
Yeah.
what I would like to suggest is a little game for you. Look at your child. See how the child is behaving, even maybe speaking, but this can be even before speaking. And allow yourself to just close your eyes and go back to the time you were pregnant with that child. And was anything happening which was provoking you to behave and think in the same way that that child is now? That is probably the simplest experiment you can do to prove to yourself the whole self principle that when mother experiences trauma in the pregnancy, her child is born with that trauma. And this was the most profound experience that I've ever had. And I know Troya shared it too, even though she wasn't there. In the first week of October in 2019, we were invited by Professor Tuchulik to come to Tambov, Russia, to speak and introduce prenatal psychology to the Nobel Committee of Russia. And this is where the Russian, in Russia, they have the museum for the Nobel whole committee. All of the family, all of his treasures are there in Tambov.
Right.
And it's exactly the way I met Troya. I was lecturing in London, not in London, it was in Swanwick, north of London. And she had come over from the Netherlands with a group of nurses and therapists. And we met, and shortly after that, she was writing letters for a year, and then the next year, the same Congress. So we met again, and then there was a doctor from the south of Holland who invited me to come to his practice, and I work with his patients. And I said to him, "Well, if I do that, you won't have any patients." He says, "That's all right." So I came over and worked for a week with him. And then Troya knew I was in Holland. She says, "When you're finished there, come up to Amsterdam and I'll show you our beautiful city."
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed.
For how many years now?
Well, 36 years.
36 years.
Yeah.
So,
And then it took another year or so that we married. That was very nice. We were one of the last couples to be married in the Amsterdam City Hall, where the documents for New Amsterdam, New York City, the establishment of New York City. New York was established by the Dutch, you know, and there were all kinds of documents. And the room where those documents were signed was where we got married. Nice, you know, little gifts from the universe.
right. So, can you explain a little bit more about what you mean when you say whole self? What is this term you have introduced there?
Well, the whole self is the totality of my consciousness that knows everything, my total consciousness, my whole consciousness in all of the lifetimes has ever experienced and wants me to remember them. Okay. And we did a book recently, which you were involved in which you described the whole self as my unchanged essence. That's a lovely idea. That was a nice gift from you to whole self pre-birth psychology. And it just again lets us recognize that it's a continuing flow of evolution, continuous flow of evolution. And we stop off here and there in a lifetime with parents. And, what we want to emphasize also here is it's not just trauma patterns that we choose our parents. We can also have very wonderful, enlightening, vibrant parents that we're attracted to because in a past life we died in a wonderful happiness.
Mhm.
So it's not all grave, it's light. And so there's, again, every variety of emotional and mental patterns. And this is another thing. It's not just feelings, it's feelings and thoughts. What are the thoughts connected with those feelings?
You could say that the thoughts are the interpretations we make, or
That's
is
right. Yes.
so. Why are they important? So, can you say a little bit more about these connections?
Well, the connections are that nothing stops totally. There is no death. There's transition, transformation, uh, moving from one dimension to another. This is also part of it. We do exist in several dimensions. We can say simultaneously, when I'm here in this dimension talking with you now, I am also somewhere else too. I'm not saying schizophrenically. I'm saying that there's a constant flow, an ebb and flow of thoughts and feelings. And this is one of the other things, coming back to your question, what we've learned. So many emotive therapies spend time getting the awareness of their client or patient to become aware of a trauma that has happened, and to keep repeating that episode over and over and over again. The reason it has to be kept repeating is because it's never resolved. It's not resolved. So they have to keep. So what we try to help people to recognize is it isn't the acting out that simply re-encodes people into the trauma pattern. And so what we need to do is not keep saturating the pattern. We need to help people recognize what actually happened. We talk about reality. Reality is whatever I believe has happened. You hinted at it before. It's what actually happened without a trance or a delusion or a belief or a lie.
Mhm.
Any words that are not in total truth. I mentioned total truth before. Total truth. That's what we're here. And perhaps, and I'm just realizing this, perhaps that's the purpose of evolution. I'm not sure if it was you or someone else who recently asked me, what's the final purpose of evolution? Was it you? It's to bring the consciousness to total truth. Bringing reality into truth. Realitas ad veritatis is the Latin. And it means, that's our motto for whole self pre-birth psychology. Reality to truth. Realitas ad veritas.
Mhm. So actually, our relationships are trying to make sense among so many realities we create.
Well, we're creators, aren't we?
Yes.
You've heard that philosophy. Every human being is a creator of their own life, and how we live it, how we are open and flowing to that life determines our health, our wellness, and our wholeness. My doctor is amazed at my heart. I just recently had my examination,
Mhm.
and I'm working every day as much as I've ever worked any time in my life, but I'm not working. I'm doing. I'm doing life,
Right.
and I love doing it.
So you say that being a creator myself, I can create health
Yes,
and nice relationships and do life or anything else away from that, depending on the beliefs, the emotions or feelings or whatever interpretations I put to what is.
yes.
What is the role of a psychotherapist or a psychologist or a counselor or whoever therapist?
Well, again, it depends on what their educational experience has been. Thomas Fernie says some people are managers and some people are doers.
Mhm.
And it depends, again, on what kind of therapist attracts me to them. Okay. So even if I have a terrible therapist, I may be there because my whole self knows that I'm going to learn something really important
Right,
about myself. So uh, any therapist is simply a mirror of what I need to learn and work on for myself.
right. So now you bring this aspect of whole self, this mirror aspect to
Yes,
our discussion.
yes, Troya is very, that's one of her main themes in all of the work that she does. What is that mirroring to me or her in her life? Everything's a mirror, and we can try to shatter the mirror, or we can learn to move into the mirror. And it all comes down to resistance.
Which speak a little bit more about the resistance element.
Well, if I don't want to see what I've done, if I don't want to learn and understand, that's called resistance. It's a wall. Troya says that smoking is a wall that I put up to not see what I have to see.
Right,
It's a smoke.
right. So actually, the psychotherapist, the therapist, the other, whoever this other is, also has the opportunity to learn for himself or herself by being present in the process of a client, a person who comes to their clinic, right?
Yes, yes.
And so is in marriages.
You see, again, it all has to do with relationships.
Mhm.
What is my relationship in my marriage or now not so much marriage as companionships.
Mhm.
In Holland, very few people are getting married. Sometimes after a baby is conceived. But if there's no baby, they don't get married. They just live together. And that's happening more and more all over the world. So uh, again, it's part of the beliefs about religions,
Mhm.
the box of religions. And more and more people are beginning to realize that they have to get out of the box, that living in the box is not evolving.
Mhm.
That's the key. Living out in the box is not evolving. They have to get, and that's why I love that phrase. I don't know whoever developed it. You have to think outside the box. Very important.
Right.
Very important. Open, open, open.
So perhaps this is a very important message you bring to the attention of all people here.
Right.
Right.
Hopefully, hopefully.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful experience, and we look forward. I think you could.